All right, folks. Well, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune because it's time for another week of the RecPoker podcast. This is the forums edition. We're going to be talking strategy all night long, and we have a new surprise for you tonight. Brand new Wrecking Crew member Ryan Laplante is here to talk about flop c-bets and board textures and sizing and all sorts of crazy stuff. He got so much amazing stuff going on over on Learn Pro Poker. We can't wait to get into more of that. But first, I have to introduce myself. I'm Jim Reid, Bluffsterini in the home game, and at RecPoker Jim in the hellscape that we call Twitter. And I'm just one of the gang over here at RecPoker. This is the forums edition of the podcast, like I mentioned, and we're brought to you by the fantastic folks over at the Running Aces Casino, Racetrack, and Hotel. Find out more about them at runaces.com. We couldn't do what we do without them because most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization here at RecPoker, and so we really depend on the support of our sponsors and our fantastic premium members. We've actually got a couple premium members we're going to introduce you to today as well. But first, I should just say that you get used to hearing my voice on Monday nights, but I am just a small piece of the RecPoker machine, a little itty-bitty cog in the gears here that make all the magic happen. We have a Wrecking Crew. That's our leadership panel. This is the group of wizards that really do all the hard work behind the scenes to make everything happen here at RecPoker. If you want to find out more about me and the rest of the Wrecking Crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew, or you can just listen up. You're going to meet a few of them right here tonight on the show.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I am PetVet33 on most social platforms. I'm Fergie56 in the home game. And I run a hand history review group the second Wednesday of every month for premium members. And the only times I miss it is if I'm living my best life, traveling the world and playing poker. So
good for you, Kim. Keep it up. We're all jealous.
I'm Rob Washam. You can find me as Rabman50 just about everywhere. And on the first and third Wednesdays of each month, you can join me and a number of premium members as we discuss the latest poker book.
Rob with the book study. What about you, Taylor?
I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me in the RecPoker home game as Gopher Boy TJM, or come check out our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/RecPoker, where we stream the home game most Wednesday evenings.
And I mentioned we've got a couple premium members in the house as well as one of the perks of spending $15 a month to support what we're doing here at RecPoker. Can't tell me that's not the best value in the poker world. Joe, why don't you go first and introduce yourself to RecPoker Nation?
Hello, my name is Joe Millay. I'm a new premium member, only been around about a month, maybe 6 to 8 weeks. I'm new to the poker world, and I'm JM Atapi on the home game.
Right on. Welcome, Joe. And we've also got the one and only Roger Schutte, a longtime active premium member and a great friend of the show. Roger, please introduce yourself to RecPoker Nation.
Hi, I'm Roger. I'm GraphX16 in the home games, and I help Jim with the podcasts.
He sure does. Every podcast you've heard for the last few years, Roger has been hands-on helping us with some of the post-production work that goes on to making it sound as great as it does and adding some images and chapters and stuff like that. Roger, we are so appreciative of all your help here on the show, and it's great that you're able to come and join and pick the brains of fantastic folks like Ryan Laplante. So, Ryan, you have been a friend of the RecPoker podcast basically since the beginning. Learn Pro Poker was our first learning with partners training partner. You're such a fantastic influence in the poker world. And I'm just so glad that we finally made it official and brought you on to the Wrecking Crew. This is really something that's been in spirit for a long time, but it's official now. Yeah.
I think I've always been part of the Wrecking Crew. I mean, like I said, when you guys started, I just really liked the idea behind it. You know, I think fans and just people who are passionate in the industry is what makes the industry run. You know, everyone who's in any type of, behind the scenes type of position in the game absolutely loves it. And, without those people running it, the industry just wouldn't really be here. Obviously the industry has a lot of downsides to it, but it's the passionate people that really make it a good place to be. For instance, if we didn't have passionate people like Tony Burns, sticking behind his reputation for, that company last year that didn't want to honor the guarantees, and he said that he would back out and he would, remove himself. Putting his ethics, his time, and his effort, where his mouth is really important. So having people that are true fans of the game and industry is what keeps it a much better place for everyone else. So yeah, I've always been a fan of you guys, and happy to always be supporting of it too.
Right on, man. Well, welcome home. Is the way I like to think about it. So without further ado, there's a lot of exciting stuff happening at Learn Pro Poker. Ryan and his team over there is always working on bringing new content, organizing the site differently, working on how to teach more effectively and connect with members. So you've recently launched a new platform, which we're going to talk about a little bit. And I know we're also going to talk a little bit about some poker strategy itself, but why don't you start off by just telling us about the new look at Learn Pro Poker?
So we're working on a couple different things. Obviously, we have our new content being added each month. We do full-length videos on the 15th and the 1st of each month. We also created a new category called Hand Library, which we've gone through each of our old group sessions and split them apart into specific hands. And then those hands are posted by themselves and broken down by category. So it's broken down by, pre-flop, flop, final table, turn spot, so on and so forth. So instead of having to go through these 2-hour-long group sessions, you can just click on Hand Library and click on the specific situation that you want to look at, and it pops up that section from the video. So you get to look at it exactly that. I think I'd say we've been adding about 5 of those videos per month too. And then on top of that, like you mentioned, we're trying out a different platform. There's this learning platform called School. You can do video courses and stuff on it. On top of that, though, there's like a forum, and in the forum, you get points for interacting with people. And then the more points you get, we're actually giving away like access to different types of content. There's like a monthly leaderboard. Everyone on the monthly leaderboard, if you're in the top 10, you get a private group session that's only available to those 10 players, to those 10 community members. So we're trying like a handful of different things, not just to bring out new styles of learning content, but also to help encourage people to interact with each other. Because like the thing is that the way in which I've really learned and grown as a player is through interacting with other people. When I first really entered the industry back, I'm pretty sure I made my 2+2 forum account within a month of turning 18, like the month leading up to turning 18. And on there, I probably have, 10,000, 15,000 posts. And that each of those posts is me generally discussing with other people and trying to become a better player. And while, yes, you do have these study tools and all these other things out in the industry in terms of helping you grow, the thing is that, these learning tools like Range Trainer Pro as in terms of a study tool is really, really good. But the issue is it just teaches you the raw theory. And the raw theory, while useful and you need to learn it and you need to know it, it's how you apply that theory and how you exploit other players that really helps you go from being an okay player to a good player to a great player. It's really that fine line between being a very theoretically sound player and also utilizing just logic and the reads you have on your opponents in order to maximize your profitability. And part of the way that you learn how to do that stuff is you meet other people. You get other people's inputs on what people are doing and why they're doing it, see how they think about and approach situations, and that helps inform your own mind and how you approach and process the game. And the thing is that, like, obviously, as a player, obviously as a player, you don't necessarily want other people to negatively influence you, but the thing is generally speaking, other people's inputs is going to inform you better about how you think about the game too. Even if it's just, I disagree with you. Okay, explain that. And if you can't really explain in depth why you disagree with them, then you don't really understand it yourself. And even those interactions, that's how you grow and improve. So doing things like RecPoker forums, doing things like any of these types of interactions is really how you improve outside of playing. And obviously playing is really important, but you kind of need all aspects. You need the peer theory studying, you need the interactions with other people, and then you need the real world examples and actually playing yourself. And the thing is that poker is so ridiculously, insanely complex that if you don't have all three, you're not going to reach your potential as a player.
I love it. And I think a lot of people like me sort of started learning in a silo, watching videos, listening to podcasts, doing workbooks, playing. And you can get better that way, but it really limits your growth as a player, and it really limits the speed of your growth as a player. Like I was talking to a new premium member today who was getting ready for the WSOP that's right around the corner. And they said, I'm a pretty new player, but I have a chance to go down and compete with these folks for a bracelet. And I'm going to get some coaching. Like I know I have a long way to go, but the best way for me to get there is by getting some coaching and accelerating my learning and having someone like show me what I need to work on. I was like, well, you've obviously been listening to the podcast for the last couple of years, because I couldn't agree with them more. And listen, everyone can benefit from getting that objective analysis from someone outside, right, to challenge your assumptions. So I think it's really valuable. So
I do a decent amount of one-on-one coaching. And just having, like, I did a session earlier today with Chris Jones. I started working with him about 2 months ago, and during that time period, he's up 30K and had a deep run in the Venom.
Pretty good outcome for Chris Jones. Yeah.
Had a couple other of my students recently who've all been putting up their best lifetime results and went from bad big blind for 100 win rates to absolutely crushing, which is always good to see. And the thing is that if you can hire a coach who has really good both learning experience but also teaching experience, they're really going to do a good job in terms of breaking apart the mistakes that you're making. And I think it's really important to have someone give you that outside point of view. The thing is that even if you're using some of these study tools where it's telling you like your BB per 100 loss rate in these spots, if you're not actually hitting some of those frequencies in game, you'll still actually be missing a lot of things. So I think having a mixture of all of these factors is really how truly good players are built. I mean, I don't know anyone who's not near the top in the industry who hasn't had a lot of one-on-one coaching. I mean, I've had a lot of one-on-one coaching. I've done a lot of one-on-one coaching. I've worked a lot with study tools. I've done like everything that I advocate for in terms of telling people to do. It's how I've learned and grown in the industry. So it's not just me saying, hey, do this, I think it works. I know it works because it's what's helped me be successful. It's helped with a lot of my friends be successful. I don't know anyone who hasn't gone through this entire process. If you want to truly be competitive at some of the highest stakes, you need to put in the time and effort and go through the whole process.
I love it. Well, let's dive right in. You mentioned you had a couple thoughts you wanted to share with our group, and I'll encourage Joe and Roger and the rest of the group. Feel free to just unmute if there's a question you'd like to ask Ryan. I'll make sure to call on you. So Ryan, this is some material that you've taken from the Learn Pro Poker
Actually,
video
this is something that's nope, this is something that's entirely separate.
Ooh, okay. Are we getting an exclusive RecPoker look at something cool? And okay,
I eventually will turn this into a theory video, but yeah, so this will be a you guys first look.
Sweet.
I need to be able to share. So someone else.
Let me just make sure that you should be able to share now. Give that a try.
Yep. All right. Sweet. Okay. So what we are going to look at today is c-bet size and frequency. Playing the flop is, of course, one of the most important aspects in particular of tournament poker. I think tournament poker, there's like two specific areas that really matter a lot: pre-flop and flop. The reason why pre-flop and flop matter so much, specifically in tournaments, more so than cash, is because of the effective stack sizes that you really face. In tournaments, most tournaments that most people play in have between 20 and 40 big blind average stacks most of the way through, which means getting to turn and having important turn decisions just aren't super common. Getting to rivers and having important river decisions are incredibly rare. So because of that, if you have an incredibly well-built pre-flop game and a very well-built flop game, it's going to be so much easier for you to play future streets just via the nature of what it takes to understand both of those streets. So I think they're important, really important building blocks. And also specifically for tournaments, you need to nail these. You just need to really be on top. Obviously for cash games, well, yeah, it's important to have those. In cash games, you really need to be on top of turn and river as well. For cash in particular, if you make bad river decisions, you're not going to have a high win rate. Tournaments, though, you can make not great river decisions and still run a pretty good win rate. just because the types of mistakes you need to make for it to be bad would have to be so ridiculously bad that we can kind of just ignore that for now. Anyway,
and that's just because of stack depth, right? Ryan,
yeah, just because of stack depth.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Exactly. It's so hard to get to the river and have more than like 0.8 pot size bets in tournaments. They're just not ridiculously common. So I think focusing on doing a quick little thing about flops in general I think is probably going to be one of the most easiest and important ways to help out players. For pre-flop, you can use charts, you can use these pretty easy study tools and stuff to really work on pre-flop. I feel as though a lot of pre-flop stuff just comes down to drilling, just really drilling these things. Just because most of pre-flop is relatively simple. I mean, it's still complex, but relatively speaking, somewhat simple. So these are the main factors that impact both the type of bet size you get to pick and the frequencies at which you get to pick each of these bets, as well as checking back. Stack depth. Stack depth, definitely the number one most important thing. Easiest way to really show why it matters a lot. If you are 4 big blinds deep on the flop, don't really have that many options. On top of that, if you are, say, 15 big blinds deep, you also, for the most part, are very limited in terms of the types of bet size you get to pick. The vast majority of bet sizes that you get to pick, sub 20 big blinds deep, is going to be a quarter pot or something similar, depending on what GTO study tool you're using. If you're using Range Trainer Pro, our small bet size is quarter pot, our medium bet size is 2/3 pot, our larger bet size is pot, and then we have over pot sizes up to 3x pot. So when you are essentially 20, 25 big blinds deep and less effective, the vast majority of the sizes you pick are 25. But on top of that, you just don't really get to bet pot very often. That's like one of the main things. When you're between 25 and like 60 big blinds deep, the number of 2/3 pot and pot size bets you get goes significantly up. There's just a lot of these like two-tone, somewhat connected board textures where at 20 big blinds deep, you're mostly just going a quarter pot. Then you get some 2/3 pot as like your large size. While at 40 big blinds deep, that exact same texture, your quarter pots cut down a little bit, your 2/3 pot goes up a lot, and then your pot size bets go way up. And the reason why this occurs from a theoretical standpoint is theory in terms of bet sizes likes to use this concept called E. It's essentially the bet size that you pick that sets up all in. E by itself is going the exact same size across the 3 streets. 2E is going the same size across 2 streets, essentially. Yeah, pretty sure I'm using that right. Anyways, concept of E. It's the bet sizes that you pick to set up the same size street by street by street. So when you understand the types of bet sizes that can set that up, then you can have a pretty good idea, relatively speaking, what is a massive bet size, or what is a medium bet size, and what is a small bet size. Like purely theoretically speaking, you should have a handful of different sizes in every spot, and each of these sizes should be somewhat dynamic. But with how complex that would be to even think about and approach it, I like to try to simplify things and have 3 specific sizes for small, medium, and large, and then approaching each spot based around that. It obviously isn't going to be exactly optimal, but being exactly optimal is impossible anyways, and the EV difference between simplification and maximization is very, very small. So our goals as players is to do a mixture of having robust sizes, so robust options that are just work really, really well without making it overly complex. For instance, I know a decent number of professionals who solve the flop for one specific size. They run a full tree, they see what like size is largely picked, then they rerun a new tree, see what between just a couple main sizes, then they run it again around just one size. Now, while I think that's a really cool from a professional viewpoint, in terms of actually learning it, I think that is really difficult because you have to understand how all these different factors go together to build out that one size. And then you need to go through the process of figuring out what that one size is. Again, that's kind of complex. So I like trying to simplify it to the point of we know what a small size is, we know what a medium size is, we know what a large size is, and then we know what factors directly impact those. So stacked up, like I said, probably the most important thing. However, the thing is about bet sizes in each of these spots, if you have one thing that's really extreme, it can sometimes by itself dictate what is the size that you pick. So a great example of this is, let's say you are fairly short effective. So maybe you're at like 12 big blinds deep effective. Maybe you open from the cutoff and the big blind defends, and the flop just comes like Jack 10 4 two-tone. This is such a dynamic board texture, and your range is pretty condensed, and you're at a massive range advantage. There's a good chance you might get a 2/3 pot flop to 2/3 pot turn jam. So even though we're really shallow effective, and this is generally going to be the main thing that'll dictate bet size, the fact that the board texture is hyper dynamic and connects with both players' ranges really well, we still might get some larger bet sizes picked occasionally. That being said, generally shorter effective, smaller bet sizes. Easy to understand, easy to apply. Board texture is probably the hardest part of this to really understand, because board texture for this doesn't just have one specific factor. Most people, when they're thinking about board texture, oh wait, one sec. Actually, here, one extra thing. Sorry.
Yeah, take your time. And while Ryan's typing out, I just want to remind our audience, if you're listening along, you can head over to the YouTube channel. And this week and next week's episode will both benefit from some visual aids. So if you're listening along, you might want to go check out the YouTube channel for this week, because you can see some stuff that's easier to help understand visually. All right, go ahead.
I had it right in my mind. I just forgot to actually put this in and then add it down. Okay, board texture. Board texture, not too complex. Sorry, ranges are super complex. Board texture isn't too complex. But for both ranges and board texture, I kind of have them combined in different ways. Board texture is a function of one general main concept: static versus dynamic. A lot of people, when they think about poker, and how I used to think about poker for the longest time, was most people think in terms of like wet or dry. Essentially, are there draws possible, or are there flushes possible, or straights possible? Theory doesn't actually care about that. Theory cares about how static or dynamic the board texture is. The difference between wet and dry and dynamic and static is dynamic and static means the more cards possible that change the best hand possible, that is a more dynamic board texture. So a very, very, very dynamic board texture might be something like King 8 4 2 diamonds. Best hand possible changes on 4s through aces plus diamonds. Another good example would be like 2 5 8 2 diamonds. Best hand possible changes on every card in the deck. Technically, this board texture won't always have larger sizes than this board texture because of our next point. But yeah, generally speaking, the more dynamic the board texture is, the more likely you need a higher equity strength hand in order to bet. And when that happens, it also generally means that you get to check back a little bit more. And when you get to check back a little bit more, then that kind of impacts what your betting range is going to look like. So on a board texture like this deuce 8-5 two-tone, when you open an early position and the big blind defends, this is a board texture that the big blind is going to have a lot of check raises on. So because of that, and since your range has a lot of ace highs and king highs and queen highs and stuff like that, they actually have a lot of hands that are natural checkbacks. So let's say you have ace, queen, no diamond here. That is the type of hand that's going to want to check back at a fairly high frequency, because if you bet a quarter pot and they 3x that, you're very unhappy with your bet. That's why it's going to use some more checkbacks. And also, the more, generally speaking, this isn't always true, but this is true, a very high frequency. Generally speaking, the more often you want to check back, the more polarized your betting range is. So on this deuce 8-5 two-tone, let's say we're 40 big blinds deep. While you probably get some quarter pot bets, your range is probably going to have a lot of 2/3 and pot size bets on it at that stack depth. This could even be true at like 25 big blinds. And actually at like 20 or even 15 big blinds, you actually might not get a quarter pot bet at all. It might just go check or 2/3 pot and set up a 2 street all in. So how dynamic or static the board texture is impacts things pretty drastically. General rule of thumb is static board texture, small bet. The more dynamic the board texture is, the more likely you will have medium and large bets, and the more likely you will have checkbacks as well. Next up, ranges. Okay, so ranges is definitely the most complex by a pretty large margin. Mostly because when people think about ranges for post flop, they actually miss a couple of things. Most people, when they think about like ranges for post flop, they think about like range advantage or nut advantage. And like those two concepts matter a lot. Generally speaking, the player who is at range advantage, which, you know, the opener for the most part often is going to be at range advantage. Usually when they're at a more and more significant range advantage, they check less because their range just wants to put in chips. You just want to shovel in money when you're at a huge equity advantage. And even your bluffs want to shovel in money because your bluffs are so well protected by the rest of your range. Nut advantage is actually, so like range advantage more impacts the frequencies of the bets and sometimes the size. Nut advantage really can impact the size. So let's say, a good example of this is, let's say you open under the gun, big blind defense, and flop is 5, 6, 7 rainbow. Your opponent on that board texture has more sets, more two pairs, and more straights. Even as they have 16, 9, 8 combos, you have 4. They have at minimum 4, 8, 4 combos and 4, 3, 4 combos. So you have 4 combinations of straights. They have 24 combinations of straights. So they are at a very significant nut hand strength advantage. On top of that, on that 765 board texture, 765 rainbow, they're going to have all the 2 pair combos. They have all 7 5s, all 7 6s, all 5 6s. You have 0. And then they also have all set combos, while you might not have all of pocket 6s and pocket 5s, depending on the stack depth that you opened on. So they're going to be at straight advantage, 2 pair advantage, and set advantage. And then on top of that, they also have pairs and straight draws that you don't have. So this out of position player is at very significant nut advantage, which means that there are actually a lot of stack depths where the in position player does not want to bet large. Like they're going to have a lot of checkbacks, and when they do bet, they're mostly going to be betting a quarter and 2/3 pot, so small and medium sizes for the most part. Now, these are the 2 main concepts that most people build post-flop range analysis around. And I think they're definitely the most important. However, when it comes to bet sizes for ranges, I think there's a couple other concepts that I like to think about as well. One, I do think a lot of other coaches discuss some different name thereof, range interactions. Essentially, it's how each range connects and interact with the board texture. So, for instance, board textures that really favor the big blind's defense range, the in position player is going to check back a lot on. So earlier when I said that, generally player with range advantage, and generally these generally player with range advantage is going to bet a lot on. Let's say it's a board like 5, 5, 4, and the big blind defended. The in position player, since they just don't have 5x a lot, is actually going to have a decent number of checkbacks, especially even on board textures like 7, 7 king, where the in position player actually has nut advantage because they're the only person that has, pocket 7s and pocket kings, and the big blind defend might not have king 7 ever, or only has king 7 suited. On that board texture, the in position player actually wants to check back a lot because that 7-7 board pair is such an important type of board for the big blind. They get a lot of check raises, and since they get a lot of check raises, the in position player actually has a lot of natural checkbacks. They want to check back some of their ace highs occasionally, want to check back some of their middling pairs occasionally, just because they don't want to bet, face a check raise, have to call, and face a barrel, and face a triple barrel. So that's not great. So range interaction is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important. And then there's this final concept. This is kind of a me thing. I haven't really heard other coaches discuss this, but I think it matters a lot. And I think it's also an easier way to think about bet sizing in general. Barrel opportunities. So let's say you open from hijack or whatever, big blind defends, and flop is 10, 5, deuce, 2-top. This is a board texture most people, when big blind checks to them on hijack, let's say you're 30 big blinds deep, this type of board texture is one that most people would go, oh yeah, I'm just going like a quarter pot. You know, best hand possible, only changes on ace, deuce, 3, 4, 6, jacks plus. So there are a decent number of cards where the best hand possible doesn't change. The out of position player, you know what, they have a 10 occasionally, they have 5s occasionally. They don't really have many 2-pair combos. This isn't board texture that you're going to be betting a lot. That's like, well, at least in the past, at least that's what I thought. Instead, this is actually a really good board texture for medium bets. And when you're deeper effective, it's really good board texture for large bets. Like, you know, at 60 bigs, you probably get a decent number of pot size bets. Like there are some of these like kind of disjointed board textures that don't seem very obvious as to being large bets, but they're very large bet spots. Another good example of this, and these types of spots are actually my favorite. Let's say you open MP1, big blind defends, and the flop is ace, king, deuce, 2-top. Yeah, you get a lot of pot size bets here. And like, let's say you're 60 bigs, 100 bigs deep. Yeah, not only do you get pots, you get some over pots. You can just go over pot, all in. You get a lot of these like, or you can go 2/3, 2/3, 2.5x pot. Like you get some ridiculous sizes in a lot of different situations. And obviously here you're at nut advantage, you're at range advantage. Their range doesn't interact with this. So a lot of people go, oh, they're just check folding a lot, so I'm generally just betting small. But since you have such incredible barrel opportunities, you actually just want to bet. So it's a mixture of each of these different things. Each act as modifiers in different ways. That's why I like, you know, if you just go, oh, what position you're in, or oh, whether, you know, so on and so forth, that, you know, is only a very small piece of it. Stack depth's only a small piece of it. Board texture is only a small piece of this. It's like there are a handful of different things that in general matter, and then each of these different things are modifiers. And how they impact it, I can't just say, oh, in all situations this happens, because that's just like never really true. There's just like each of these different things impacted in different ways. And there are times where I am incredibly surprised by what I think our range is supposed to break apart into. And actually, the second part of this, what I'll show you guys is a mini game I like to play with myself in terms of looking at ranges for flops, and not just going, oh, what does my hand supposed to do, but going, oh, I'm supposed to check back 20% here. My range is supposed to go 30% quarter pot, 15%, you know, 2/3 pot, and 15% pot. And then I'll look at what GTO does. So I'll first guess for each, so I know globally what my range looks like. And then once I see where I messed up, try to figure out why I messed that up. Because when you understand globally what how your entire range is supposed to play, like what's it supposed to be broken down to in terms of frequencies and sizes, then it's so much easier to logically figure out where your current hand fits into that framework. So your goal as a player isn't just to look at specific situations, it's to look at the entire framework of how the game is built and how everything approaches a situation. And then from there, you can narrow it down to your exact hand.
Well, that sounds really easy, Ryan. How do we just visualize the entirety of the game tree for every given spot, and then just, you know, have our hands slot right into that?
I'm about to show you how to do it a little bit easier. I'm not saying it's easy.
No.
It's easier. Nothing's easy in poker, unfortunately. No. Outside of like, you get aces, someone goes all in. That's what you get to call pre-flop. Unless it's a satellite bubble.
Right. Yeah.
So even that's not easy.
No,
nothing's
and
easy.
We like it that way.
You have the nuts on the river and your opponent goes all in.
Yeah.
Call. All right, that's it.
That's right. If it was easy, everyone would be a bracelet winner. This is the best. This is the way
this is sure. All right, position. And by position, I actually don't mean the players' like actual positions at the table, because their positions at the table is actually built into ranges. All this stuff is how these ranges are built around. So ranges are, they open in early position. So they have 30 big blinds. So they have about 18% of hands. Big blind defends. Big blind defends also on 30 big. So they're defending about 75, 80% ish, right around there. Okay, then because of that, the in position player is going to be at significant range advantage, pre-flop, nut advantage, yada, yada. Okay, the board texture comes out. Since the opener has this range, the big blind has this range, this is who has nut advantage on this flop. This is how each of the ranges interact. These are their barrel opportunities. So the actual ranges at the positions at the table, that is here. And notice I do not say EP, MP, button, cutoff, whatever. It's built in automatically, all that stuff. Position is literally just, are you in position or out of position? Being in position and out of position affects things a lot, and it actually affects things more the deeper effective you are. So the main way in which position actually affects pre-flop, but also post-flop ranges, but really we'll just focus on post-flop right now. But the main way in which position impacts post-flop ranges is there's this main concept in, globally speaking, here, let me go back just a tiny bit. I'm going to
Do it.
Very slight tangent. When you're playing poker from like a theoretical standpoint, you're trying to achieve two different goals. Just two. You're trying to achieve equity capture or equity denial. And equity capture and equity denial are heavily impacted by this concept called equity realization. And what equity realization is it's how often your hand actually gets to achieve what it's trying to achieve in terms of its raw equity. So when you look at, say, any of these GTO study tools, you have EV and you have equity. EV, that is expected value, which is essentially EQR. Some of the other study tools, they have EQR as well. But yeah, EQR is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important. It's based off of how your range plays or how this hand plays. This is how much you're going to capture of the pot. And the reason why it's largely different than just actual actual raw equity is on the flop, the hand doesn't just end always. There's always going to be some type of continuation in some capacity for the most part. So when it goes bet and fold, okay, bam, your hand just, you got that equity, but actually when you bet and they fold, your hand actually over realizes equity because your opponent gave up pot share. So that's why position can matter a decent amount, because position impacts the amount of information you have on your opponent. And the deeper effective you are, the more important that information is. Because the deeper effective you are, the more likely so your deeper effective you are, tighter ranges are pre-flop, so you actually see less flops. But once you see the flop, you're more likely to be seeing turn, and you're slightly more likely to be seeing river as well. And on top of that, you're more likely to be making really important decisions on each of those streets. So that added information advantage is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important. So position, whether you're in position or out of position, it even matters at super shallow stacked ups too. There's actually spots when you're really, really shallow where actually being out of position is kind of great. The classic stop and go. We want to go all the way back in time, and now it's come full circle. There's a lot of great spots to do it. But on top of that, position, besides for giving you that information, because in position can just either end the hand or go to the next street, they're actually in this weird world in terms of what options they want to do. So the out of position player usually has way more flexibility in terms of the sizes that they get to pick, which sounds kind of backwards, because the out of position player can't just check and end the hand. The out of position player has to try to do something or check to get to the next street, whatever. They have to generally try to do something in order to see the next street, or they have to hope that their opponent checks back. So there's a lot of spots where out of position, you'll get a quarter pot bet. These situations way more likely on turns and rivers, but still really important concept to discuss here and how it can affect things. On turns and rivers, generally speaking, the in position player should only ever bet half pot or larger. On river in particular, this is almost always true. It's true in like 99.5% of river spots. where the imposition player only gets to bet half pot or more, or whatever, an all in if it's less than half pot. On turns, the main spots where it happens less frequently are some of these like late position opens, button calls, EP, MP opens. So like when it's a non-big blind player who is out of position, and the in position player is between essentially MP2 and button, there are some spots where they get to bet less than half pot, but it's not many. Generally speaking, if you're in position on turn and river, you can just go, my hand wants to bet half pot or more, or my hand wants to check. If you do that, if you simplify your turn and river decisions like that, they will be so much easier for you to play. And you'll also are way less likely to open yourself to getting pushed off equity that isn't supposed to bet. How it works on flops is, generally speaking, since that in position player is at such an overall large advantage, the out of position player checks a lot. So a great example of this in which the out of position player can actually be at a range advantage and still check is under the gun open, hijack calls. There are a lot of board textures where the out of position player is checking at incredibly high frequencies. Even though they're at a pre-flop range advantage, they could even be at a flop range advantage too. And as long as that flop range advantage isn't ridiculously massive, they're going to be checking at incredibly high frequencies. Usually between like 25 and 60%. It's pretty common in most of these spots. There are some spots where it's higher, but they're pretty rare. Multi-way pots. So heads up, generally speaking, you just get way more flexibility in sizes. In heads up pots, there's a lot of situations which you get to go 2/3 pot or even pot. In 3-ways and 4-way pots, if you have ever looked at any simple 3-way solves, it's very, very rare that you get to go larger than a quarter pot, especially like if we could run proper 4-way plus solves, I would bet a decent number of money that a bet larger than a third pot is picked like less than 2% of all situations. It's just going to be incredibly rare. And even for 3-ways, it's probably less than like 4%. Well, for heads up, there's just so many spots where you get large bets. There are just so many of them. So easiest way to think about this is one of the easiest ones. Generally 3-ways or more players. Theory wants to go small. Exploitatively, we get to do a lot of stuff, but theory wants to go small. So all of this stuff, by the way, pure theory. Pure theory. Nothing to do how I actually play in real spots, in terms of, or at least maybe not nothing, but less to do with how I play in real spots. One of the other, single raise pot versus, I mistyped this. One of the other main factors that heavily impacts bet size is whether it's a single raise pot, 3-bet pot versus 4-bet pot plus. Generally speaking, in 4-bet pot plus situations, sizes above a quarter pot are incredibly rare. Like incredibly rare. It's usually you just get small bets. The main board textures in which you get all-ins actually are Jack 10x and 9 10x two-tones. There's a lot of those spots where you just get to jam. I've seen some like 2.5x pot rips on those. Like even in these 4-bet spots, so you do get some bigger all-ins, but they're very rare. And the reason why is in 3-bet and 4-bet pots, people's ranges are very condensed, and small bets perform incredibly well versus condensed ranges. I think I understand why, but this concept is, it's really complex. It's really in depth, but generally speaking, like anytime ranges are really condensed, theory just gets to go small. And I think it's just because in general, these small bets just perform incredibly well in terms of getting rid of raw equity, and all of your bluffs just don't mind going small. And while your range is still a lot of value, you still just get a lot of small bets. In spite of that, these small bets are way more common in 4-bet plus. In 3-bet pots, though, there's still a lot of tiny bet spots. There's just so many small sizes picked. Generally speaking, as well, in these 3-bet and 4-bet pots, checking is incredibly rare for the pre-flop, for the final aggressor pre-flop. Generally, the pre-flop aggressor in these 3-bet plus pots are C-bet and incredibly high frequencies. It's pretty rare that they don't. I'm trying to think of like the specific spot where maybe something like like MP2 open small blind 3-bet off of 40 bigs becomes like maybe like 9-8-6 or 7 or 8-7-6, like those like middling triple connected boards, I think the out of position player is going to check at fairly high frequencies. And we can double check this spot in RTP, but yeah, this stuff should be fairly true. And then finally speaking, ICM or risk premium. ICM and risk premium, they're pretty much interchangeable. Essentially, ICM, independent chip model, and risk premium is a mathematical concept people built to show the types of frequency or the types of equity edge you need in order for you to be able to play this situation. So the higher ICM, the higher risk premium. And ICM causes condensed ranges and pre-flop and impacts post-flop stuff and condenses ranges post-flop as well. Again, in terms of sizes, if you ever looked at ICM solves, the higher the ICM pressure, the smaller the 3-bet size is. So let's say it goes, let's say you're 6-handed and middling stack opens and chip leaders on the button and wants to 3-bet a lot or 3-bet a decent amount, relatively speaking. The open might be to like 2.1x. That in position 3-bet on 30 bigs is just going to be like 2.3x their open. So it's going to be like 4.8 bigs. And if without ICM, it would be a 2.3x open, and a full 3-bet would be to 3x their size, which is a massive difference. Also, ICM fucks pre-flop ranges in ridiculous ways. There's a lot of spots in ICM where pre-flop, you're just like, you don't really get many calls and you're just 3-betting, or like, you know, big blind is defending like 28% of hands instead of defending 75. There's like a lot of like really crazy stuff in terms of pre-flop ranges that happens. And since pre-flop ranges get really condensed, then a bunch of weird shit happens post-flop. The types of board textures that the ranges interact with changes a lot. So ICM could actually, like at any point, one of these factors for the most part could actually be the most important thing that dictates bet sizing in a given hand. But the reason why I rank it in order of importance like this is because these three main things are really like the most important that you really need to be generally thinking about. And then really these four, I guess. And that these three things are really just a function of ranges. But I like to keep them a bit separate because it makes it a little bit easier to understand as a general concept. So, okay, was that simple and easy? Did everyone understand everything I said? And can use it in game now?
Yeah, I was gonna say, let me summarize for our audience. So if you're listening along at home, Ryan's laid out sort of these 7 factors to consider when you're deciding about c-bet size and frequencies. And it starts with stack depth, board texture, ranges, and position. Those are the big 4. And then Ryan likes to kind of flush it out, even though it's already kind of contained within ranges, to talk about whether it's heads up or multi-way, whether it's a single raise pot or a 3-bet or more, and whether or how much pressure we're under for ICM, or how much of a risk premium we're facing at this point in the tournament.
Exactly.
So Ryan, I think one problem that a lot of players have is they're like, okay, so I understand that there are these 7 factors. How do I weigh which ones should be more important than others? And do you want to talk about that now, or should we save that for next week?
No, we can do that now. Okay, so we're going to play that.
So yeah, so talk to us. And again, I'll get on the YouTube, folks. This is going to be a lot more easy to digest with.
So we'll show a quick situation here. We'll just do EP open. We'll do big blind defend. Oops. There we go, big blind defend. Throw out a board texture.
10, 5, 4, 2-tone.
Okay. Oh, whoops. This said big blind folded. One sec. There we go. I don't know why this is happening. One sec. Okay, I've literally never seen that happen before. Okay.
It's okay. It's just because we're live on the air. It's actually
usually how that goes.
We're not even technically live, but since we don't edit these, you're essentially live on the air. Okay.
All right, 10, 5, 4, 2-tone. Okay, so we're gonna play the easiest version of this game. We're not gonna look at what big blind defend is supposed to do on this board texture. So it's 10-5 for DD, heart, diamond, diamond. And the options are check, 25% pot, 67% pot, and pot. These are sizes at the stack depth. Okay, so what is a big blind supposed to do here with their range? Taylor?
I'm gonna guess that they're gonna check like 92%. And probably the rest into like that 25%.
I think that's pretty close. I think they're not leading at all. They're just going to lead 0%.
Okay.
The reason why they're leading 0% is because this board texture, this is a board texture that's incredibly good for early position, like ridiculously good for EP in terms of the range advantage, their barrel opportunities, all that type of stuff. And while the big blind definitely connects pretty well with this texture, it's not quite as good of a texture for them as it looks because of this 10. So let's say this 10 is a 7. Now I think what you said is probably nailing it. So it needs to be a better board texture for them. So based off of actually what I just listed here, it's pretty easy to tell where that mistake came from. Essentially, it came from a mixture of range advantage and then board texture and range interaction. Generally speaking, usually when you make one of these types of mistakes, if you have this stuff listed, you can kind of try to figure out where you made the mistake and why. So now for the really hard one, I'm going to see how poorly I do this. Okay, so I don't think we check back super often. Just because we have really good barrel opportunities, we're at a pretty large range advantage. Big blind is supposed to check raise us a decent amount. Big blind probably check raises us around 12 to 15% versus quarter pot, probably around 8 to 10% versus 2/3, and probably around 6-ish% if we go pot. So they do have pretty good range interaction. My guess is that we probably get a tiny amount of checkbacks, but probably not that many. I think everything else we have going for us is pretty good. And the fact that we're EP, I just don't think we're going to check back very often. And this could actually be lower. I think it's probably 15 at highest. My guess, if we open from hijack and big blind defend, we would probably be checking back a lot more often because we'd have a lot more hands in our range that are just easy natural checkbacks. We're 30 big blinds deep effective, so I think we get a lot of quarter pot sizes. At 30 bigs, we probably actually do get some pot sizes as well. So I think I'm going to build from pot on down, and then that should help me build out 25. So I think we probably get pots around 15-ish% would be my guess. This could be too high because we're at 30. Yeah, I'm going to go like this. And then I think the rest we split here. My guess is since the big blind has pretty good interactions here, and since they're probably check raising pretty often versus quarter pot, we probably actually don't want to go quarter pot too often, especially since we're at a fairly large range advantage. We have a lot of hands in our range that want to barrel. Both our ranges interact pretty well. So we probably want to go a little bit more polar with our betting range, but we probably can't pot too often because we're too shallow effective. So my guess is maybe something like this.
And if you're still listening at home, that's 10% check, 30%, 25% pot bet, 50%, 67% pot bet, and 10% full pot bet.
So Ryan,
yep.
I'm curious why the 10% check in your mind, because in my mind, I was thinking that we would be checking this a decent amount, probably more like the 30% was kind of what I was envisioning in my head. So
I think if we open from hijack or cutoff, I think that's true. Because I think then we have a lot more hands that have okay-ish equity, and we're at much less of a range advantage. From EP, I think we're at such a large range advantage that we don't have that many checkbacks because our opponent isn't check raising us as much. If you open hijack, I think when you see bet flop, big blind's check raise percent goes up. And since their check raise percent goes up, then naturally we have more checkbacks because we can't really face a check raise with as much of our range. So I kind of try to view checking back as a function of what our opponent is going to check raise. And the more likely they're to check raise, the more likely we check back. But I could be wrong here. Honestly, like when I play this game, I'm like, most of the time I feel as though I'm pretty okay with it. And then I'll just pull up a spot that I thought I know pretty well and just completely butcher it. Hey, okay, I was a little bit off, but I'm less off than what I thought, so I'll take it. All right, so I was right about the low frequency check. So all the concepts that I thought kind of fit in kind of worked. And I was right about this. So where I fucked up was essentially this. And the main way that I fucked up is I essentially, my guess, if we look at this spot at 40 big blinds, we probably get this 10% pot. And we might get, and then this would probably just slot fully into here. So I assume that our check back percent would drop and then our pot percent would go up. So essentially the mistake I made is I over assumed stack depth in terms of the bet sizes I got to pick.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is let's say I didn't have this here. I didn't know exactly which factors mattered, how they mattered, and why they mattered. Then how would I know where these mistakes happen? And obviously I could still be wrong about what these mistakes look like. I'm just saying, logically speaking, this makes sense. And the way we can check it, actually, I can just check it immediately. Let's go to 40 bigs. So trust, but verify. So if this shifts the way that it does, then I can immediately see that what I pointed out is where those mistakes came from.
And I love that Range Trainer Pro has this fair use delay in there. Kudos to you guys for keeping that there at a time.
Look at that. Yeah, baby.
Yeah, 10%, just like you said.
And then look at this. Nailed that. Bam, bam. This is kind of where I fucked up. Now at 40 bigs, we get a little bit more pot than what I expected. But if I had done 40 bigs, I probably would have almost nailed this, would be my guess. I'd have been very close to this. So now I know at 30 bigs, what I screwed up is that we just don't get to pot as often, even though we have all those same factors going for us. We're probably too shallow effective. So at 30 bigs, we can probably go 2/3 all in to set up that, E bet size. And that's probably where, since we have these three sizes picked, that's essentially what happened is it probably condensed around a size that was close to E. So easy, isn't it?
Well, I think what's powerful about it is that it really is something that recreational players have a lot of trouble with, is, as you say, visualizing how our entire range performs and then letting us sort of use that to guide. So where do these individual parts, where do these individual hands or these kinds of hands fit in that? And I think it's difficult for us to visualize the parts of our range that we're not currently playing.
Right.
Is there a tip that you could give for recreational players to kind of just get better at visualizing their entire range?
You essentially want to build tools like me listing those 7 items. That is a guidepost to help visualize ranges.
Yep.
Because, if you know how each factor dictates bet size and frequency, and thus checking back, then that makes it much easier to understand how hands fit in. So me building out this list and explaining how they work and why they work in different ways, this is the main way to actually help with that visualization. So when you look at a range viewer and you look at a situation, you can analyze which of these factors matter, how it impacts it. And as you can see what I did there, you can play that game. And then when you're way off, just mess around with different situations that impact each of the different things. So for instance, if I change that over and for whatever reason, like it didn't fix it to where I thought it would go, then I would have looked at it in different factors. I would have instead of us opening EP, I would have had us open hijack and look at big blind defend, or so on and so forth. So you can use these mixture of general guide rules in terms of how things theoretically work, and then use the actual study tools to work hand in hand in helping you visualize things more and more and more. And I've looked at so many of these spots. I have built this GTO study tool. I use other training tools as well, and I put in a lot of hours. and it still is incredibly difficult. And the thing is that it's never going to be easy. It's just, it requires a lot of hours of work. And this, like me even getting to this point to where I can build this stuff out and explain it and explain how each things interact and why it interacts like that, is you're literally seeing 15 years of me both playing professionally, but also coaching as well. So it's incredibly difficult, and there's just no getting around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great game, right? Takes a couple years to learn and a lifetime to master. And you certainly, the more I talk to great poker minds like you, I really do appreciate how little I know about this fantastic game of poker. Rob, Roger, Joe, Taylor, Kim, any questions for Ryan? Ryan, you've been so generous with your time tonight already. I really appreciate you breaking this kind of stuff down. And you've in a lot of the Learn Pro Poker videos that I've watched, you do have like just some very simple guidance pieces up in notepads or in like a graphic representation of player types or things like that. I guess that would be one question. And Joe, if you had one, feel free to jump in as well. I saw you on mute there for a second, but Ryan, what are some of the handiest little like visual guides that you've put together to help you?
Okay, so the way in which I actually visualize ranges, here, if you can give me, yep.
Yeah, you should be able to share here.
So I do it a couple different ways. So I do a grid method. This is like, so like when I open, I know what my opening range looks like from a theoretical standpoint. When my opponent calls, I know what their calling range looks like. So I literally just visualize that. And then when cutoff is calling, I visualize their calling range, right?
And this is just the simple 13 by 13 box.
This is just the grid. And then this is what it's in.
Okay.
This type of visualization is somewhat difficult. It takes time using these. And you just, anytime you see a situation, you have to kind of do your best to burn it into your mind, kind of what it looks like to some degree. You don't need to be perfect with it. You just need to be able to go, okay, so when I open an EP and the big blind defends, big blind defends, and it comes like ace 10, ace 10, 10, two-tone. You check. If we continuation bet and they call, they probably don't have a 10 anymore in their range. So then we start with this loose pre-flop range that they're defending with. This range that they're defending with, on flop, when they check call, their range now just has the main types of calling hands that they have. So then in my mind, I chop out everything they're folding and leave in the things that they're calling. So this type of visualization, if you want to play poker at a high level, you need to get good at it. And it just requires a lot of practice. There is an easier way to visualize though, and I actually do use this. I don't really have a name for this. You can call this like, I don't know, line ranges, whatever. A lot of different ways you can do this. But I literally here, actually, let's do it like this. No joke, I do it like this. Okay, so this is a range, 0 to 100. This has every hand in it. So this type of range, this would be a loose linear range because it has everything in it. Polar range.
Yep.
Has a bunch of nuts in it, has a bunch of bluffs. Superpolar range. Most of the superpolar ranges usually have some like nut blocker type hands. So they'll actually like kind of fit here. And then they'll have some here. So an example of like a superpolar pre-flop range would be something like these are ace 4 and ace 5 suited. And then this is like, aces, kings, queens type stuff, something like that. So this would be superpolar, polar, strong range, superpolar range. Then you have I would call this a somewhat loose linear range. This is just going to be a more linear range.
And for all these lines, you're drawing the pocket aces are on the right and the deuce 7 offsuit are
Yep.
on the left. Yeah, so you can see how
Strong linear range.
Yeah.
Post flop, like some of these like super polar ranges sometimes look maybe not exactly like that, but instead of it being here, it'll be like a weird blocker that has no showdown, so it might be actually down here. Like these ranges can like shift a little bit, but it's more about the general concept of, okay, when someone's repping the nuts and like just has a couple of bluffs, then their range is going to be super polar. And then the types of bluffs that they use are going to be a little bit stronger, a little bit more nut weighted. This type of like these like kind of polar ranges, these types of ranges are pretty common in like loose value bet spots, where the value betting player has a lot of value hands to pick from, which also means they have a lot of bluffs they get to pick from too. More value combos you have, more bluff combos you get to have. So this type of range here, this would be the just strong linear value. Great example of a strong linear value. Very tight passive pre-flop player who 3-bets. Jacks plus ace king. This type of range might be an early position open from a tight aggressive player. This might be a mid position open from a loose aggressive player or a button open, so on and so forth. Then you have, there's a handful of other different types of ranges, but these are like the main ones. And generally speaking, so what I'm doing is when I'm playing versus people, I try to use the grid as much as I can because I want to think about like what actual hands they're using. But I use that to actually modify into this. And the reason why I do this is because when I can visualize what the range looks like and I can visualize where my hand falls in that range, that's what this is for. So let's say I have a hand that falls anywhere between here to here. They are all equal bluff catches. In terms of I beat all their value, I lose, or I beat all their bluffs, I lose to all of their value, right? In which case, any hand that falls in this category is a call if my opponent is over bluffing. If my opponent is under bluffing, the only hands that are calls are hands that also block their value and unblock bluffs. And then if they're significantly under bluffing, in which case then the range looks more like this, or the range looks, maybe they have like a loose value range, but not many bluffs. In which case, I actually want to use my best bluff catches, the things that fall here. I actually want to use them as bluff raises, not as bluff calls. Because they're not bluffing enough, but they're value betting thin. So then I get to bluff raise a lot and never call. But if they're bluffing equally or bluffing enough, then this hand makes not a good raise. It just makes a very good call. Then I want to bluff raise a hand more like down here. So by using these like visualization tools, it's actually pretty easy for me to go, not only where does my hand fall along their range, but also what type of hand it is. Is it a good bluff catch? Is it a good bluff raise? Is it a good thin value bet? So let's say on the river, I'm up against, this is cap ranges I didn't bring up, but we will discuss them now quick. Okay, so this is going to be a weak, loose, capped range. So when I have a value hand that beats our entire range, then it purely comes down to, do I think my opponent's going to call a lot of their range for a large bet? The answer is yes, I'm going to be as greedy as possible. But let's say instead of them having like a fairly loose, weak capped range, let's say instead they have an extremely weak capped range, and they're all just down here. So maybe they just have a lot of ace highs because, flop one, check, check, I bet turn they called. They have a lot of natural ace high calls. They would have raised anything that's a decent amount stronger. So maybe they have like mostly ace highs with like, maybe a random mid pair. So the range looks like this and I'm way up here. Then I actually want to target these hands to call. The way in which I target those is going to be villain and, situation dependent. Sometimes these hands, when you bet small, they'll just go, oh, this is a value bet, and they'll just fold and only call this. In which case I might go hyperpolar. I might try to make my range look like this or look like this. And when I get my range to look like this, then all of these hands become natural bluff catches for them. So when I'm playing against an incredibly good professional, and we're both aware that they have a weak capped range, I'm way more likely to go hyperpolar because I want to represent the thinnest value range possible. And often what will actually happen when they don't know me too well is I'm actually going to have a hand that's here. So my value range will actually look like that. And they won't realize that because I'm kind of repping a range that looks like this.
Yeah.
So like I might go like 2.5x pot in a spot with like, I don't know, top pair, no kicker because it beats their entire bluff catch range. And I want to go as hyperpolar as possible to represent the most weird polar range and turn all of their range into natural bluff catches. So like using a mixture of the grid visualization and then simplifying to this actually makes it pretty easy, relatively speaking, for me to find creative and weird sizes and find things that might work in that situation. Where if I was just using the grid, it'd be so much harder for me to go, okay, where in that does my hand fit? So I take that, I simplify to this, and then I take this and figure out where I fall into it.
It's really interesting. It's like Flopzilla. One of the great things about Flopzilla is that it takes these pre-flop ranges and then demonstrates the various hand strength of those different kinds of buckets across different boards.
So that's essentially
kind of what you're doing here in a more simplified way. I really like that way of getting at the because pre-flop it's just about hand combos and like hand classifications. Once you start throwing boards in there, it really changes the kind of ways that hands are different from each other. So I like the way that you've constructed this range, which is I think much more intuitive for how we actually approach post-flop play.
So if you want to better understand how this stuff works mathematically, so I built for Learn Pro Poker this post-flop, all this post-flop content, flop, turn, river, yada yada. In our river theory video, so using for all of these theory videos, I actually hired Michael Acevedo.
Amazing.
I made these a handful of years ago, 2021, I think I made most of these. At the time, he did the book Theory of Poker, and in that he did a lot of math, like lot of math. Yep, modern poker theory. There we go. And in that, he actually hired a mathematician, like a PhD mathematician, to graph and solve for river theory. And essentially what they did, which is if you see this stuff, players 1 range beats players 2 range, which I showed a visualization of that, where I beat the entire range and I'm trying to get calls. Perfectly polar versus bluff catcher, polar versus bluff catcher with traps, polar nuts weighted, polar air weighted. Essentially, a lot of the stuff that I just built out for you and how I discussed it were each of these different types of ranges. And when there's so this guy built out these math equations for these. The math equations are surprisingly ridiculously complex. One sec, let me find.
Oh yeah.
Okay. No, that's super easy. Or a little bit further down.
It's great seeing all this stuff.
Okay, yeah, here's the equation for this specific one.
Right.
If you can't see this, I would try to say what this says, but I actually can't say what it says because I have no fucking idea what it says.
No, that's way too complicated for
me
to say out loud over the podcast. Check out the YouTube, folks. You got to see it.
Yeah, this is Diffie Q, but probably a level or two higher than that. And I don't remember my Diffie Q from high school calculus. Anyways, what this video does and what Michael had this guy do is not only just figure out what each of these different ranges look like and how they interact and why, but they mathematically solve it. So you can graph like what the EV looks like based off of the bet ranges and like the sizes you're supposed to pick. And you can actually do it based off of, for this video in particular, or this section of this video, and what this equation is for what percentage of their range is traps and how deep effective you are, what the optimal bet size is.
Wow.
And the thing is you would think that this is, I mean, it is complex, but like the thing is like when you understand that your entire range or most of your range that wants to bet for value, or essentially all of it, beats their entire bluff catch range, which was the spot that I just showed, where I was saying that I might even go like 2.5x pot. I actually had a spot come up where versus a good friend of mine I went 4.5x pot for value with like a pretty thin value hand. And he was pretty surprised to see it. And it was because I knew that my value hand beat his entire range. And I knew based off of how deep effective we are, what the optimal size was. I actually knew in the spot that I could 9x pot all in. So I exploitatively downsized by going only 4.5x pot. So when you understand the underlying concepts behind how a situation works and how each range looks and how they interact, then that becomes much easier to make really good decisions with it. And all this stuff, I know like I've been talking about it from a pure theory standpoint, yada, yada, but actually all of this stuff applies versus every opponent that I play versus. Because all I'm doing is visualizing their range, visualizing where my hand falls, up into the range, and then based off that, whether my hand has enough equity to go for equity capture, or whether my hand has the right types of properties to go for equity denial. Which that's what poker is based around: equity capture and equity denial.
Amazing. Well, folks, if you want to get more of this fantastic material and work with Ryan directly, you'll find some links in the show notes for how you can join Learn Pro Poker, and even tell them that RecPoker sent you, which helps us out, which is great. You can also go to rec.poker/potential and check out Ryan's Wrecking Crew page, where you can see all sorts of other features and offers that he's got going on. And is it at Potential on Twitter as well,
Yep.
Ryan? And where's
with the MN at the end for Minnesota.
Potential MN, of course, that's right.
Yep.
And is that your preferred place for folks to come tap you on
Yep.
the shoulder?
Twitter is definitely ideal. Yep.
All right, fantastic. Well, is there anything else, Ryan? I can't imagine. I mean, I could talk to you all night about poker, but is there anything else on this subject you want to leave us with, or does anyone else have any
I think
questions?
I covered most of the bells and whistles.
I think you did too. And some great features. Again, folks, if you didn't get a chance to watch this, go check it out on the YouTube. You can see a lot of great behind the scenes stuff from Learn Pro Poker, from Range Trainer Pro, which is one of my favorite training tools as well. And you'll just get a lot more out of this episode, I think, if you do. So without further ado, thank you to the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Thanks to Ryan Laplante for such a great episode. Joe, Roger, Rob, Kim, Taylor, everyone who's listening along at home, thank you for all your support. We couldn't do what we do without you. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the RecPoker Podcast. Have a good night, everybody.